They told me when I turned 71 that I was finally allowed to be ridiculous, to keep the knitting needles by the armchair, to forget names, to talk about the weather as if it were a life's work. I liked the idea of being harmless. It suited the soft creases around my eyes and the way my hands moved now, slower, with the certainty of habit. But harmless is a look you wear, not a thing you are. Under my cardigan was a spine that had paid taxes, raised boys who became men who owed me favors, and buried a husband who used to whistle in the garden. When the cough came, thin, stubborn as a weed, it started like a whisper and learned to shout. The doctor's words were sterile and severe. Surgery or the pain will teach me things I do not want to learn. 40,000, he said, as if it were merely a number on a form and not the value of tomorrow. I went to my family the way a beggar goes to the church, quietly, with hope folded neatly into my pockets. My son hugged me the way men hug when they want to borrow courage. My other children swore they'd help if things get worse. It was my daughter-in-law, though, who set the first match to the dry brush of my life. She stood in my kitchen with the light behind her like a halo that made her teeth seem sharper. "Even if you get treated," she said with the calm of someone reading the morning paper, "it's a waste. You've had your time." She cradled my knitted sweater like an accusation and laughed, the sound large enough to fill the room and small enough to cut me loose from the family I had knitted, stitch by stitch, into being. You are supposed to be ready for certain cruelties at that age. The small betrayals, the phone calls that stop coming, but some cuts land like a betrayal of physics. They say the world has shifted and you never felt the tremor. I sat at the table while they measured compassion in cash and measured my worth in price tags. Outside, the maple by the gate had already begun to burn red. Inside, the hands that once steadied my teacup judged me bankrupt. I thought about all the nights I had stayed up nursing fevers and mending shirts, how I had taught them to tie a tie and to tell the truth. The thought of walking into an operating room with the echo of that laugh behind me planted a different seed, not of surrender but of a patient, certain hunger. If you believe life is only the sum of its losses, then this will not surprise you. I did not go gentle. The world that had counted me out had misread me. Something in me, colder and more methodical than grief, began to plan in plain sentences. Revenge, I decided, must be tasteful. It must be inevitable. It must be justice that belongs to the calendar and not to the temper. I would not shout, nor would I grovel. I would set the house of cards on a clean table and watch the way the strongest hands failed to hold them steady. But that is getting ahead of myself. For now the cough teaches me patience and the laugh in the kitchen is a kind of promise. They told stories about the house like it was a hymn. It had been built with my father's hands and my mother's patience. A narrow, stubborn cottage on Elm Street with a porch that watched the years go by and a cellar that smelled of lemon oil and memory. I paid for piano lessons and college applications with overtime and odd jobs. I mended Sunday shirts by lamplight and, yes, knitted sweaters that smelled of lavender. My husband planted the pear tree. My son learned to climb it. When people asked where I came from, I said simply, "This place," because to me that was both true and enough. Everything that mattered, birthdays, funerals, the small quarrels that stitch a family together, happened in the rooms of that house. It is astonishing how quickly people begin to count on what was given as if the giving were an entitlement. My son, David, is a cautious man with a generous face and the habit of folding difficult things away to look at later. He visited on Sundays when work allowed and helped with the heavier shopping when the snow made the pavement dishonest. He loved me in a way that was practical. He called with appointment reminders and tipped the gardener, and that had been enough. Then came Anna. She arrived like an arranged storm, tidy, opinionated, with a handbag that always matched her shoes. She polished the silver, rearranged my books for better feng shui, and learned which side of the sink I preferred my tea mug. She wore competence the way people wear perfume. It announced itself before she did. At first I admired her. Who doesn't like a daughter-in-law who can fix the leaky tap without calling a plumber? But admiration curdled into an unnameable friction. Anna treated my history like a draft proof. Something to be corrected, improved, made presentable for company. Her jokes about old-fashioned quilts were knives wrapped in napkins. There were small things that taught me who she was. She insisted the deeds be checked, casually at a dinner the way people test the pulse of a conversation. She suggested we sort out the attic and seemed surprised when I told her certain boxes were mine to bequeath as I liked. Once at a family meeting she proposed selling the pear tree because the roots made the driveway heave. David laughed and let it go, but I watched her eyes fasten on the property like someone cataloging future assets. She had a way of making ownership feel like an arithmetic problem she intended to solve. "When I paid for the new roof 2 winters ago, my savings, my stubborn pride," she remarked, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "you should keep your affairs in order, Mum," as if financial prudence were a one-way street leading away from her. I had my own quiet guardianship of the house. There was a shoebox in my bedside table with the certificate of purchase, a photograph of the contractor with his grease-stained grin, and a brittle copy of an old will my husband and I had signed for peace of mind long ago. The will named David as primary inheritor because he was our son, but it also included a line we added late one night over tea, that should David predecease me, the house was to remain in the bloodline, to be kept for grandchildren and for the memory of things past. It was a small clause written in a careful hand, meant to keep our little world from being pulverized by the wheels of convenience. I did not think to hide that shoebox. I did not imagine anyone would weaponize paper and ink against me. The household balance shifted when my health became the arithmetic headline. Hospital bills have a way of clarifying people. Conversations that had once been about menu choices and grandchildren became ledgers and calculations. Anna began to speak in the language of efficiency. "We must think practically," she would say, which meant, as time made clear, we must think in ways that preserve our investments. Her laugh, the one that had echoed once in my kitchen like brittle crystal, turned from something I brushed off to an index of her priorities. When she called my sweater quaint in front of her friends, it was less about taste and more a demonstration of the softer world she found inconvenient. The house she admired as a potential asset suddenly looked smaller through her gaze. Not a cradle of history but a chest of things to be redistributed. And so the stage was set. The rooms that had held lullabies and scoldings now listened like an audience. My son loved us both. That complication is real and tender and the kind of thing grief and anger both trip over. But Anna was the calculator at his elbow. She was patient with me the way a chess player is patient with a piece until it becomes inconvenient. The seed of revenge, small and sensible at first, took root in the soil of all those little slights. If they would measure me in bank accounts and legal standing, then I would answer in the same currency. Strategy, timing, and a will that they thought only sentimental. I began to sort my paperwork again, not as a frail task for a forgetful woman, but like a general preparing a map. It started with a wheeze that sounded like a secret trying to escape. At first I called it the winter, blaming the cold air, the damp house, and the old pipes that coughed in sympathy. But it lingered and lingered again, like an uninvited guest who rearranges the furniture while you sleep. The doctor called it fibrotic lung deterioration, a phrase that landed on my table like a bill I hadn't budgeted for. There were medications, yes, but mostly there was waiting. Waiting for breath to return, waiting for the ache in my ribs to stop feeling like betrayal. Knitting, once my ritual of order, became a battlefield. The needles slipped more often. My fingers, still nimble in memory, now trembled like thin branches in the wind. I tried to finish a sweater for my grandson, navy blue, his favorite, but the rows tangled when the coughing fits came. There is a humiliation in helplessness that I had never known before. To be betrayed by your own breath, to find your body has turned conspirator. I would sit by the window, yarn pooling in my lap like a forgotten sentence, watching the street go by in clean, effortless motion. Mornings were worse. The act of rising, a simple stretch of spine and will, became an expedition. The kettle hissed, I took it as a challenge. Tea cooled before I could finish it. The mirror above the sink began to look unfamiliar. My skin thinner, my eyes rimmed with the sleeplessness of pain. The stairs, 12 steps exactly, grew taller each week. I learned to pause halfway, pretending to admire the faded picture of my late husband. I whispered to him sometimes, half in prayer, half in complaint. David would visit and say, "You need rest, Mum." He said it softly with a look that tried to stretch concern over guilt. He brought groceries, fruit I couldn't always peel, and promises he could barely afford. Anna, ever efficient, arranged my pills in a color-coded tray. Her voice was brisk, her smile efficient, the kind you give a stranger you'd rather not see twice. "You mustn't push yourself," she'd say, and then under her breath, "We'll need to think long-term about this place." This place. As though the house were a burden, not a legacy. As though I were temporary in the walls that had known my laughter for 50 years. At night, when the coughing rattled the quiet, I'd listen to the house breathe with me. The settling beams, the ticking clock, the pulse of the radiator. It's a strange thing to feel your home pity you. My knitting bag stayed open beside the bed, a patient project waiting for better days. Sometimes I'd dream of the pear tree outside, the one my husband planted the year David was born. In those dreams, the air was easy, the light golden and kind. But dawn always woke me with the sound of my own lungs, sharp and dry like paper tearing. Then came the hospital visit, the kind that changes the narrative. The doctor looked at me with that careful neutrality they teach in medical school, as if tone might change the math. "We'll need to schedule surgery soon," he said. "The fibrosis is advancing. Without intervention, well, we can't promise much." I didn't need to be told what "can't promise much" meant. He handed me a printed estimate. 40,000. Not a word, not a sentence, but a verdict. I folded it neatly, the way you fold a letter you intend to remember. That night I tried to knit again. My hands shook, my chest burned, but I finished one sleeve before dawn. Uneven, imperfect, stubborn. The sweater was meant to keep my grandson warm. I suppose now it was keeping me steady. I pressed it to my face and breathed in the faint smell of wool and lavender. Somewhere beneath the ache and the fury, a thought began to form, quiet, deliberate, and absolute. If I am to die, I will not do it as their burden. And if I am to live, I will make sure they never forget how small they made me feel. That was the night the revenge began to take shape, not in anger but in clarity. It was on a Sunday, the kind of late morning that smelled of toast and boiler steam, when I decided to ask for help. The letter from the hospital lay on the table beside my knitting, a pale sheet of truth among soft colors. I'd rehearsed the words in my head, not as a plea but as an explanation. I had raised these people. I had fed them, soothed them, stitched their names into stories. Surely there was enough love left in the ledger for this one mercy. David and Anna arrived a little after 11. He carried flowers, white lilies, though I had told him once they were funereal, and she brought a basket of organic fruit that looked more decorative than edible. She walked into the house as though she were the one who owned it, the way people do when they've stopped pretending to visit and started rehearsing possession. "Sit, both of you," I said, folding the hospital letter like it was a peace treaty. "There's something we need to talk about." David nodded, concerned, polite. Anna perched on the edge of the chair, immaculate as ever, her perfume sharp and deliberate. I told them everything. About the worsening breath, the surgery, the cost. I kept my voice steady even when my lungs tried to interrupt. When I finished, the house was silent except for the clock. 12 chimes that sounded more like a countdown than time passing. David spoke first. "Mom, that's a lot of money." "Yes," I said. "I know." He looked at his hands. I could see the arithmetic of guilt crossing his face. Mortgage, school fees, responsibilities that wore my love as justification. "Maybe we could take out a loan," he offered weakly, but even as he said it, he knew he wouldn't. Anna crossed her legs, slow and deliberate. Her expression was sympathetic, the way a painting is, beautiful, unmoving, and utterly detached. "I think we should be realistic," she said. "Realistic?" "Yes." Her tone was firm now, a professional voice she probably used when negotiating sales or dismissing interns. "You've lived a long, full life. The doctor said surgery might not even guarantee anything. I mean, even if you get treated, it's a waste." There was the sentence that changed the gravity of the room. David turned to her, startled. "Anna." "No," she continued, a tremor of impatience threading through her calm. "We have to be practical. The cost of this operation could wipe out our savings. What happens if she doesn't survive? What happens to the house? To us? The house. Not me. The house." She spoke as if I were an obstacle in her way, as if dying neatly would be the kindest favor I could offer. For a long moment I said nothing. I just looked at her, and I think it unsettled her, that stillness. I wanted to laugh, truly. The kind of laugh that cracks the air open. But I didn't. Instead I smiled. A small, closed smile that had seen wars and funerals and still found time to be polite. "I see," I said softly. "You're thinking of the future." "Exactly," she replied, mistaking my calm for agreement. "We all have to." David reached for my hand, guilt softening his features. "Mom, we'll figure something out," he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. It was a whisper already apologizing for itself. I nodded. "Yes. I'm sure we will." After they left, the lilies remained on the table, leaning toward the light like mourners. I sat there for a long time staring at the space where Anna had sat, where she had said waste as though she were discussing expired milk. That evening I pulled out my old shoebox from the bedside table. Inside were the deeds, the original will, the photographs, the life I had built in paper and ink. I turned over the property documents, tracing the lines of my signature. Every loop and curl of my handwriting was a reminder. This house was mine, not a gift, not a placeholder. Mine. I slept badly that night. Dreams came in fragments. The pear tree losing its leaves, the stairs growing longer, Anna's voice echoing, "It's a waste, it's a waste, it's a waste." By morning, something inside me had hardened into purpose. Over the next few days, I observed them both with the quiet patience of a scholar studying insects. They came by with groceries, polite smiles, rehearsed kindnesses. Anna straightened the cushions I'd deliberately left askew, commented on how cluttered my side table looked, and once asked offhandedly if I'd ever considered downsizing. "You know," she said, "a smaller place might be easier to manage." I played the fool. "Oh, you're right, dear," I said. "I hadn't thought of that." Her eyes gleamed. A flicker, just a flicker, of calculation. She thought she was winning. But what she didn't know was that while she was busy counting her inheritance, I was rewriting it. The next week, when David dropped me off at my doctor's appointment, I asked him to stop by the post office on the way back. "Just some old paperwork," I said casually. He didn't ask questions. He never did. Inside the envelope was a newly drafted will. It wasn't written in bitterness. I don't have the luxury of hasty rage anymore. It was written with clarity. The house would not go to David nor to Anna. It would pass directly to my grandson to be held in trust until he came of age. The clause was airtight. If anyone challenged it, the property would be donated to the local library, the one I helped fund years ago when no one else cared about literacy drives. That night, as I sealed the envelope, I felt lighter. The cough still burned, the pain still lived in my ribs, but the helplessness had drained away. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it exhales quietly through tired lungs. A few days later, Anna returned, smug from some dinner with friends. "Have you thought more about what we discussed?" she asked. I looked at her, my voice calm, almost sweet. "Oh yes," I said. "I've taken care of everything." She smiled, satisfied. "Good. It's for the best." "Yes," I whispered. "For the best." In that moment, I felt something almost like peace, because she didn't know she had already written her own downfall. It came quietly, not with shouting, not with tears, but with that particular stillness that follows inevitability. I had always known the moment would arrive. I had planned for it the way one plans for a storm. Windows fastened, valuables safe, heart steady. I did not rush it. Revenge, I had learned, ripened slowly. By the time my surgery was scheduled, the house was ready, as if the walls themselves understood what I was about to do. The will sat signed and sealed, witnessed by the notary and by Mrs. Collins from next door, who'd known me since the year the pear tree was a sapling. The deed transfer to my grandson's trust had been processed. The envelope was tucked in my bedside drawer beneath the knitting yarn, its presence both secret and sacred. Anna, of course, had no idea. She mistook my calm for resignation. She believed I had accepted her cold arithmetic, that I had made peace with the idea of dying quietly, tidily, like a room she could clear out in an afternoon. 3 days before the operation they came again. David, weary and cautious, and Anna, bright as a blade. She carried paperwork in a neat folder, her talisman, her language. She had that smile of hers, the one that announced she was about to be reasonable, which was always her way of being cruel. "I spoke with the real estate agent," she began. "He says properties in this area are still fetching good prices, even with the market slowing down. It might be wise to put things in order now, just in case." "In case?" I asked mildly. "Well," she hesitated for effect, "in case the surgery doesn't go as planned." She didn't flinch saying it. That, more than anything, was what I admired, her commitment to her own cruelty. David frowned. "Anna, maybe this isn't the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time," she said briskly. "Your mother's been asking us to think ahead. Isn't that right?" I smiled, the kind of slow, deliberate smile that makes people nervous. "You're quite right," I said. "I've been thinking ahead. In fact, everything's already in order." Anna blinked, briefly thrown off balance. Already? What do you mean? I met with my lawyer last week. It's all been handled. You won't need to worry about a thing. The pause that followed was delicious. You could almost taste the unease in the air. Oh, she said, smoothing the hem of her blouse. That's good. Yes, of course. We only want what's best for you. I nodded. I know. When they left, I sat by the window, the pear tree's branches casting restless shadows across the floor. I could hear the echo of her shoes down the path, confident, certain. And for the first time in months I laughed. A dry, raspy sound, but laughter all the same. The surgery went well. Or well enough. I woke to the smell of antiseptic and the faint beep of monitors. Pain was still there, but it was clean pain, the kind that meant survival. David was by my side when I opened my eyes. His face was pale and damp with relief. Anna hovered behind him, smile carefully measured. You're awake, David whispered, squeezing my hand. So it seems, I said, my voice thin but steady. Anna leaned forward. We're so glad you pulled through, she said. You're a fighter. Always have been, I replied. When I was discharged a week later, they insisted I stay at their place until I regained strength. I agreed, not because I needed them but because I wanted to watch what came next. At their house I noticed little changes. Anna's confidence had grown. She'd begun referring to my home as the property. When guests came, she would slip it casually into conversation. Oh yes, we'll probably move in once the paperwork's finalized. I said nothing. Silence can be the most intoxicating of poisons. Then 2 weeks later the letter arrived. A thick envelope stamped with the law firm's crest. It was addressed to me but marked for distribution to family members upon recovery. I called them both to the sitting room. Anna came first, curious, cautious. David followed, his usual nervous energy humming beneath the surface. What's this about? She asked, trying for nonchalance. Just something I wanted to share with you both, I said, setting the envelope on the table. Since you've been so helpful. David frowned. Mom, you should rest. Oh, I will, I said. But first I think we should read this. I opened the envelope with deliberate slowness, the paper whispering like a confidant. I read aloud the first line of the lawyer's letter. Confirmation of updated will and transfer of property as per client's wishes. Anna straightened in her chair, her pulse visible at her neck. I continued reading, my voice steady. The property at 17 Elm Street is to be placed in a trust, overseen by the family solicitor, for the sole benefit of Michael Ellison, grandson of the testator, until he reaches the age of 21. The trustee shall ensure the property remains maintained and unencumbered. Should any immediate family member contest the terms, the property shall be forfeited and ownership transferred to the Briarwood Public Library Foundation, as a memorial donation. The silence that followed was exquisite. Anna's smile faltered first. Then her voice, brittle, cracking around the edges. Wait, what do you mean trust? Why would you? Because, I interrupted gently, I thought it best to plan ahead. Just as you said. David's eyes darted between us. Mom, you didn't have to. Oh, I did, I said. You see, it would have been such a waste to let the house fall into the wrong hands. Her face drained of color. I watched her search for words, for composure, for the arrogance she had worn like jewelry. But arrogance has a way of slipping when the ground shifts. You can't do this, she managed finally. You don't even. Oh, but I can, I said, my voice soft, lethal. The papers were filed, witnessed, and stamped. The house is no longer mine to give or take. It belongs to my grandson, and if anyone tries to meddle with it, the town gets it. I trust the library will keep it warmer than some people ever did. For a long moment she just stared, the calculation in her eyes replaced by something rawer, smaller. David put a hand on her arm, but she shrugged it off. Her lips trembled. I leaned back, feeling the ache in my ribs, the old cough threatening to return. I may be ill, I said, but I am not senile. And I do not forget cruelty. The clock ticked on. Somewhere outside, a car passed, its sound distant and irrelevant. Anna rose abruptly, muttering something about needing air, and walked out of the room. David stayed behind, silent, ashamed. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him with a raised hand. Don't, I said. You were silent when it mattered most. Now let silence be your punishment too. He nodded, his eyes wet, and followed her out. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without coughing. The house, my house, would stand as it always had, defiant, unbought, unbeholden. I had stitched my revenge with the same patience I once stitched sweaters. One loop at a time, steady, deliberate, unbroken. And when I closed my eyes, I imagined my grandson years from now, running his hands along the banister, laughing in rooms that still remembered me. That, I thought, is what justice sounds like, the sound of a future they can never touch. It's strange how peace arrives, not like a parade or a hymn but like the quiet turning of a page. Came to me slowly in the small ordinary hours. Mornings became gentler. The kettle's whistle no longer sounded like a reprimand. I could breathe again, not easily but fully enough to feel the rhythm of living. The doctor called my recovery remarkable for your age, and I almost laughed. Age has nothing to do with it. Revenge is the most potent medicine there is. The house on Elm Street has grown quieter but not lonely. The air feels cleaner now, as though it, too, is relieved of the pretenses that used to crowd the rooms. I've taken to sitting on the porch in the evenings, wrapped in my shawl, watching the light fade over the pear tree. The tree has grown thick with fruit this year, small, defiant offerings of sweetness. Sometimes I imagine my husband's hand brushing my shoulder, his old voice saying, "You did right, love. You protected what mattered." David still calls sometimes. His voice carries the kind of hesitation that only regret can teach. He talks about work, about Michael, about how the neighborhood's doing. He doesn't mention Anna much. I've heard through Mrs. Collins, who hears everything worth knowing, that they've been arguing more often, that Anna has been keeping to herself. I suppose disappointment is a hard mirror to look into. She thought she'd married into an inheritance. She ended up marrying into a lesson. I don't gloat. That would be too easy. My revenge wasn't about humiliation. It was about balance. About restoring something that should never have been stolen. Dignity. The days pass in small rituals now. I knit again, slower, with patience and pleasure. The sweater I'd started before the surgery finally found its way into Michael's hands. When he came to visit last week, he hugged me tight, his small arms fierce around my ribs. "Grandma," he said, "Mum says you're a hero." I smiled. Children see truth before adults learn to bury it. Sometimes I still think of that day, the laughter in my kitchen, the word waste tossed like a stone. I remember how it felt, that cold bloom of disbelief in my chest. And then I think of this house, still standing, still mine, still wrapped in the sound of my own heartbeat, and I know that word has lost its power. It's a curious thing, how strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just endures. It watches and waits and chooses its moment. When people think of revenge, they imagine anger, but real revenge is patience made visible. It's a woman smiling while everyone else underestimates her. It's paperwork filed quietly, signatures written in steady ink, and the sweet silence that follows when the ungrateful finally realize they have been outplayed. The cough still comes some nights, but I don't resent it anymore. It's just the body's way of reminding me I'm still here, stubborn, inconvenient, alive. I sip my tea, I knit another row, I listen to the world turning outside my window. And sometimes, when the breeze passes through the pear tree and the leaves whisper like gossip, I swear I can hear the echo of my own voice, younger, stronger, saying, "You should never underestimate a woman who's been told she's a waste." I laugh then. A deep, full laugh that shakes loose the shadows. Because I didn't die. I didn't fade. I rewrote the ending. And that is the only kind of victory worth having. If you've ever been underestimated, remember this. Patience is power. Kindness is strategy. And sometimes the quietest people hold the sharpest pens. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe every story deserves justice, even if it takes a lifetime to claim it.